This is chapter 5 of Understanding Human Communication, and I don't know what page yours is, so I'm going to get started. This is the 13th edition. Unfortunately, I still don't have the 14th edition. The first thing we're going to talk about is the nature of a language. Language, of course, is a collection of symbols governed by rules and used to convey messages between individuals. Symbols can be the words, symbols can be how we say the words. We'll talk more about that as we get into nonverbal. But symbols can also be gestures. It can also be a thumbs up, which in our culture is fine. In other cultures, it has a different meaning. A-OK, typically okay in our culture, but in other cultures and done in different ways, it can have different meanings as well. The first thing you need to remember about this definition of language is that it is symbolic. It is filled with symbols. We use these symbols, and those symbols are how we convey meaning from one person to another. The meaning of those symbols are in people and not in the words. The words themselves have no meaning except for what we give them. So, but words are important, though. We'll talk more about that. There are two types of meaning. There's the denotative meaning, which is the dictionary meaning. There's the connotative meaning, and that's the meaning that the word has as we use it within the culture that we're involved in. I had a student a few years back say to another student that LeBron James was really sick the previous night. When I overheard it, I asked the question, well, was he so sick he couldn't play? I said, oh, no. Sick is good now. You may know that already. I didn't know it at the time. That was, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, however long it was. That was connotative meaning. That's not the dictionary meaning, but it is connotative meaning. A good way to remember this, by the way, when I started to teach it, I started realizing sometimes I would get them confused. And I thought, oh, here's the way to remember it. Denotative equals dictionary, or D equals D. And connotative equals cultural, C equals C. So if you remember that D equals D and C equals C, then you will have that down as a way to remember connotative and denotative meaning. Language is rule governed. There are different rules that govern how we use language. There's phonological rules, how words sound when pronounced. Syntactic rules govern the structure of language. If you want an example of how that gets violated, a lot of times, especially in television, you may remember the character Yoda on Star Wars, and he would misplace the places he put his words was not the norm. And that's one of the ways they distinguish him from other people. Semantic rules deal with the meaning of specific words, especially within the context that they're used. There are examples on here of how, semantically speaking, if words are used in certain ways, it can create the wrong impression or the wrong meaning. And says one of those is for those of you who have children and don't know it, we have a nursery downstairs. And then, of course, the peacemaking meeting scheduled for today has been canceled due to a conflict. Well, okay. Pragmatic rules govern how people use language in everyday interactions. And what we use as language and how we use language in everyday interactions oftentimes is guided by the setting, the person that we're interacting with, and the setting that we're in. Now, I did skip over it just for a second, but I'm coming back to it now. The triangle of meaning, and this triangle of meaning has been around for a lot of years. And it has, if you look at the triangle of meaning, you have at the top, you have the user. Down to the left, you have the word, and down to the right, you have the thing. So if you have the word dog, okay, then you have the user. Over here, you have the actual thing. And when someone says the word dog, what this person pictures will be different than what the other person pictured. I might picture a dog as warm and friendly and small and cuddly and very hairy, possibly. If I own a little lap dog that has a lot of hair that lives inside. You or someone else might picture a dog as mean, big, mean, and dangerous. And of course, there are dogs that are thought of as that way, at least in our culture as well. And so there are different meanings we get out of words. Excuse me. The power of language. Language shapes values, attitudes, and beliefs. Language is very powerful. The words, the names that we use for our children is sometimes we need to stop and think, okay, how is this going to sound? We were looking at some a name for one of our kids, and we were looking at the initials and went, no, let's not have that. Let's not have that particular arrangement of letters creating an initial sequence that could convey something that might be unfortunate. So anyway, you need to think about that. They've done studies that shown that children with shorter names oftentimes are more liked than other kids. They did a study that showed that people running for office, the one with the shorter last name, actually won a majority of the time. It's a fairly significant majority of the time, won the election. So language that we use affects our credibility. When we use certain language, it can convey various things to other people that we might not want to convey. There's a status that is conveyed. Think about standard English and how we use English. then there are ways that people use English that conveys feelings about them that are not necessarily accurate. And so that's an important thing to remember as well. There's sexism and racism conveyed by the language that we use. Unfortunately, there are times where people use language that they should not be using, language in class that offends anybody. Don't care if they're black, white, purple polka dotted, gay, straight, whatever it may be. In my class, if you're going to do a speech for my class, you're going to be involved in my class, you're going to be in a class discussion, any of those things along that line, you're not going to want to use any of those kinds of offensive words, because I can give you a 0 on the speech, and I can wipe out most of your activity points that I give to you for being a reasonable participant in class. Those are things that can add, and those are things that can be subtracted from. You do not want to use offensive language toward anybody in one of my classes. So that's an important thing to remember. Language reflects beliefs, values, attitudes, and beliefs. There's certain kind of language that's more powerful. If it's clear, concise, and direct, conveys a little bit of a stronger feeling of power. Affiliation, we sometimes use language where we're trying to converge with other people, or we use language that is trying to diverge from other people. When we moved from California to Pasadena, California to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, my children were very, very adamant they were going to help each other, make sure they didn't pick up a Southern accent. And they were like, if one of them said something or they dropped a G, I'm fixing to go, which is kind of a Southern thing, a very Southern thing, actually. The other one would get on and say, no, don't say that. So talks about attraction and interest. There's where the demonstrative pronoun choice, these people want our help versus those. Language using negation. If my wife asked me, well, how was dinner? I say, well, it wasn't bad. Did I like it? Well, the average assumption was I didn't say it was good, so it wasn't something that I liked that much. We're going to go forward to language of responsibility. It statements versus I statements. It didn't get done today, boss, versus I didn't get it done today, boss. It didn't get done clearly is trying to convey to the boss it wasn't my fault. So there's you versus I statements. You made me angry when you said that, or you made me angry. When you say I became angry when you said that, then we are owning our own emotions. To say that you became angry, to say that you made me angry, that someone made you angry, that's not owning your own emotions, and it's implying someone has a magic button somewhere on your head. Someone can come and they can just push that button. As long as they push the right button, they have the ability to make you angry, and they don't. Now, we do grant people a space in our emotional makeup. And so what someone might say to us, if someone we never knew said to us, well, you're an idiot. And we never met the person, so that person's having a bad day, don't know them, who cares? Your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, someone that you care about says, I need to talk to you. I just need to make sure you understand, you're an idiot. Well, that may hurt, but that's because we grant those people space within our emotional makeup. And so that's okay to do, but it's still best to use language that owns the emotion. Well, when you called me an idiot, I became angry when you said that. So then you're still owning the emotion. But statements, well, it's a good idea, but it won't work. Well, Tom or Sue or Jane or Bill, you've been here for 5 years. We've really enjoyed having you here. You've been a really good employee, but what's coming? What's coming next? What's coming next usually is not good. So the but oftentimes negates everything that was said before. Questions versus statements. Do you think we ought to do that? And if I ask that question and you say yes, then if something happens, it doesn't go well, I can blame you. Well, I didn't say we should. I asked you if you thought we should, versus I think we ought to do that. So troublesome language, there's a language of misunderstandings, equivocal language. We can say things sometimes where we're trying to say things in a certain way. I was once trying to pay my wife a compliment, and about an hour later, I found out she was angry with me. And she said, well, you said this. I said, no, I didn't. She said, well, you said this, and that meant that. I said, no, that's not what I meant. I said this was criticism of myself, which was a compliment to you. And every time I've ever told what it was I said to any group of students, and there were young ladies in the class, every last one of them told, oh, no, you said that wrong. That was not the right way to make that, to explain that to your wife or say that to a woman. Relative words gain meaning by comparison. I'm 6'3". For someone to be tall, they need to be 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", right? If you're 5'2" and someone's 5'9", you're going to say, oh, well, that's a tall person. Whereas I'm going to say, well, that's a short person. Relative words gain meaning by comparison. When I was 20, I thought, 30 people 30 years old are old. Got to 30, and people are 40-year-old, 50-year-old. Got to 45, 50, people who are, 65, 70-year-old. Well, now I'm almost 65, so, you know. I'm still middle-aged. I plan to live to 125, 130. Anyway, slang and jargon. Yeah, you just have to be careful about slang and jargon. When we become used to using certain slang, it's hard to not do that then later. You don't want your child using the F word or some of the language like that you've accidentally used in front of them. You just don't want it to happen. And children repeat things, they just do. You got to be careful with jargon as well, because sometimes we forget that jargon on the job can have more than one meaning. So, abstract language can create more. It can create misunderstandings. You got to be careful about that. I always use the example of food versus meat versus steak versus say meat versus chicken versus barbecue chicken. And now there's one thing where you say, "Well, I'm going to eat some food." No one knows what you mean by that exactly, at least. But if you say, "I'm going to have some barbecue chicken," that's a very different statement. There talks about using behavioral descriptions when there's a misunderstanding. You talk to someone, tell who's involved, and what circumstances the behavior occurred, and what behaviors were involved. And that way, you clear up with somebody. Well, you were doing this, and this is, maybe explain how it made you feel. And someone may not even know all that. I had no idea, because from where I come from, that's okay. So it may not be okay. There's disruptive language where we confuse facts versus opinions. We talk about who the greatest basketball player of all time. Usually the discussions revolves around Michael Jordan or LeBron James. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the all-time leading scorer in the National Basketball Association, the NBA. Sometimes we confuse facts and inferences. He hit a lamppost while driving down the street versus he was daydreaming when he hit the lamppost. Emotive language, it can pretend that it's describing something, but actually be announcing an attitude for it. And so if we use emotive language, we have to be careful, because someone may take that differently than we meant it as well. Emotive language, a good example, my dad used to have what he called his antique collection in the corner of the living room. My wife called it his junk corner. That's emotive language. It's announcing how she felt about what was there. Gender and language, there are some myths regarding gender and language. We're going to go through a few of those. One is that women talk more than men. That is false. That is not true. They've done studies that show men and women use almost exactly the same number of words in a day. It says women do and men talk about different things. That's true sometimes. There's one that this book doesn't have. I don't think this book has it. Another book had this. One of the myths that some men have is that women gossip more than men. That's not true either. Men and women gossip almost the exact same percentage of the conversation in a day, but they do gossip about different things. When romance is concerned, it's complicated. That's true. There are just different ways that we sometimes express the fact that we care about somebody. A woman, typically, this is very stereotypical, by the way, because in my relationship, I'm the one who says I love you, and my wife says I love you too. But in the average relationship, the wife might say I love you, and then the man might say I love you too. Women typically express emotions more. It does say men and women communicate for different reasons. That's often true. Women are more more expressive emotionally. That is true. That's often true. Not always true. Again, there are couples across the United States where that's inverted, where the woman is not as expressive and the man is. It says men don't show their feelings. Again, this goes back to those stereotypes. Partly true, partly false. Some men do, some men don't. Some men do in certain situations and not in others. So there's various ways that goes. Talks about the idea that men and women are hardwired to communicate differently. There are some elements of that may be true, but a lot less than people might assume. They have studied little boys and little girls at very early ages and seen difference in how they use language. But men and women are socialized to communicate differently. Men and women are socialized to communicate differently, and that is definitely true. If a young man speaks in aggressive ways, a young boy, sometimes that's he's a real leader. Whereas if a young girl speaks in an aggressive way, we say, well, now, young ladies don't talk like that. That can become problematic, because if we see something as appropriate or inappropriate just based on the child's sex, male or female, not necessarily the right way to judge that. Again, part of that's just the culture in which it is involved, as a matter of fact, as far as whether it's good or bad. That is the end of chapter 5.